Welcome back to my channel. I'm Pam from Wellness Untamed, and welcome back to week 5 of the Three Rivers Pantry Challenge of 2024. Enjoy! So for the first meal, quite honestly, I'm not 100% sure what this is. It seems like a week has been so long ago, but I do know it is some kind, I think maybe some kind of steak that I made the previous week that was leftovers, and I made like a gravy and put it over the last of the beer bread that I had made in a previous week and topped it with some microgreens for some added nutrition, and that was just a leftover dinner after work. I also had some produce in my crisper drawers that was getting to the point that something had to be done with it. And so there you saw me just juicing up some cuties, and I had quite a few of them, and it filled 2 ice cube trays, and I put those in the freezer and then took them out after they were frozen, put them in a Ziploc bag, and then just stuck them in the freezer. Sometimes recipes will call for just a little bit of a citrus or orange juice, and sometimes it'll call for a lot. I know when I make carnitas, that recipe calls for quite a bit of orange juice, and so it's just kind of nice to have that in the freezer for times when you don't have, those citrus items in the refrigerator. I also had still some more of those grapes from a previous video, and it was time to make something happen with those as well. There were a few of them that were still perfectly firm. I held those back to put on a salad that you'll see later in the video, but the rest of them I washed and sliced them in half, and I ended up putting them in my dehydrator and dehydrated them up like a raisin. The great thing about raisins, homemade raisins, is they don't even taste like raisins. These tasted like a very concentrated version of a grape. And I have made these before with a different type of grape, and I had the same experience. So different than a store-bought raisin, at least in my experience. So I'm putting them in the dehydrator, and unfortunately my dehydrator wasn't full, which is not ideal, but this time of year it's kind of hard to get a full dehydrator of something. I also had a lime in there, which I decided not to juice, and that I thought it would be good enough to hang on to till later in the week when I could use it in a Mexican dish. I also had a big bag of avocados from Costco that I totally forgot about. And so I took those out, which I don't think I got footage of that. I took those out of the crisper drawer and cut them in half, and then just diced them up and put them in a Ziploc bag and in the freezer, that I can make guacamole with those, or, you know, avocado toast or something. There are the raisins completely done, and they're still big, even though I cut them in half. But the avocado, I kept 2 of them back to use later in the week. This was a leftover lunch. I got called to work on the spur of moment and needed to grab something quick, and that was a leftover lunch from a previous dinner the previous week. And then here's that microgreen salad with the last of the black grapes and some fermented red onion and possibly some crumbled cheese. And because was getting low on microgreens, I had some under the lights, but they're just starting, and so I'm going to be going a week or so without any microgreens. But I decided to put in another tray, and so this is what I'm doing here. I'm just starting to plant. I've got the seed starting medium there that I put into a tray. I have tried different kinds of seed starting medium. I've tried some that are made out of hemp, and they work fine. I just, for some reason, have the feeling that when there's when they're in this kind of medium, the flavor just seems better to me. And it's not that I wouldn't use the hemp mats. I certainly would use them again. They're a lot cleaner. They make way less of a mess, but you just have to give up a little bit of flavor, but the nutrition is still there. Microgreens have a ton of nutrition, and this time of year when you can't grow, at least in my region, you can't grow greens outside very easily. This is a great way for me to get a lot of nutrition in just a little small amount of greens. So I was just choosing my microgreens, which what seeds I wanted to use there, and it is a mix of brassicas. And so there are suggestions on seed spacing. I am not fanatical about seed spacing. I'm not going to take the time to do that. I just take a handful and sprinkle them around, and if it looks right to me, then that's where I leave it. And they actually do fine. It is a little harder to grow them in the wintertime because, for me anyway, just simply because I do them in my basement. I shouldn't say it's harder. It's not really harder. It just takes a little bit longer for them to germinate because they are in my basement. It's cooler in my basement. But what you do is you sprinkle on your seeds, and then I put another dark tray on top of it. I have a couple pieces of wood in there just for a little bit of weight to hold them down because microgreens actually germinate they need the darkness. And so I just put them under there, even though I have the light on, it's no big deal. I have the black tray to stop the light. And then those are some that have just kind of started to come through, and I just had taken the tray lid off of those. This was another lunch I had taken to work. It's just some sourdough toast with some pickled eggs that I made egg salad out of and sprinkled with microgreens. And I believe that was the last of the microgreens for the week. And this is just showing some popcorn. I am a big popcorn snacker in the winter time. If I feel like I need a snack, I feel like that's probably one of the better ones I can do. It's from a local farmer, it's organic, and I put a variety of different toppings on, either grass-fed butter and salt. I've even done bacon bacon bits, and I've done Romano cheese grated up. So I just do a variety of different things on the popcorn. Then I decided that I really wanted to get some of the chicken in my freezer canned. I am the one that likes chicken around here. My Tom is not a poultry eater. And so it's nice for me to just have the chicken canned. And when I come home from work, I can just grab a can of chicken off the shelf and do a variety of things with it. I don't really season it. I put just a tiny bit of salt in there, but the main seasoning I use varies depending on what I'm going to use it for, whether it's soup or whether it's chicken salad or put on a pizza or, I don't know, in a casserole, whatever. I can just put whatever seasoning I want on it at the time. But since I had a few packages of it in the freezer, I thought I would get some of those out. I also had a package of a bone-in that was half of a chicken from a local farmer also, and I did debone some of that except for one piece, which was the thigh, and that's what I ended up having for my dinner this night. But I cut everything up and I raw pack my chicken. I have tried to raw pack with the bone in also, and that's fine. But in the end, I end up taking it off the bone anyway because it kind of falls off the bone when you're trying to take it out of the jar because the canning process cooks it. So even though I'm raw packing it, by the time it's done canning, it's totally cooked and it will fall right off the bone. So there's no point in leaving the bone in it, in my opinion. So I just cut everything up. Now you see the completed thing. I think it was 75 minutes for pints in my pressure canner, if I remember correctly. And you can see it's still bubbling there. It's fresh out of the canner. And while that was going on, I was also making some stock with the bones, and I had vegetable scraps in my freezer that I pulled out, put in the stock pot, and let that simmer. I didn't let it simmer for a full 24 hours because I had to work, and I was trying to do it around work, and I let it simmer for like 18 hours, I think, or maybe it was 12. I think it was 12 hours. And then I canned the broth there. And that I think is pretty fresh out of the canner also. And I just got, it cooked down quite a bit, so I only got 4 quarts. And actually, I think I had a little more than 4 quarts because I ended up putting some in my refrigerator to use in a later in the week for a recipe. But my electric canner only holds 4 quarts or 5 pints, so this was perfect. And now I'm going to be quiet for a second so you can hear the sound that is music to every canner's ears. There you go, that little ping. That is what you want to hear from every single jar. And I can see that there's a couple other jars here that hadn't yet done it, but they all sealed fine. Then I still had some of this chopped bacon that I actually had gotten at Christmas time for potato soup, and I still had part of it in the freezer. So I took it out, I cooked it up, and put most of that back into the freezer after it was cooked, but then saved the drippings to cook with. And I ended up making here some little cabbages that I had. If you leave your cabbages after you harvest the main cabbage, it will grow little mini cabbages. And so that's what these are. And I needed to use them. And this has some bacon drippings over it. It was perfect for lunch for work. This is my dinner. Now there is a thigh in there, and all that other stuff there was just scraps I had cut off as I was canning the chicken, and I was cooking it for my dog along with my own dinner. So, and here's the final chicken thigh that I did, and I had a couple sourdough waffles in the freezer, so I just did chicken and waffles and did a sauce to put over top, and it was very good. I don't know that I would make sourdough waffles again, at least not this recipe. They're dark because there's cinnamon in there. They taste good, but they're just not like my mama's. And then I took some broccoli out of the freezer and just did some steamed broccoli with butter on Friday night. There's some leftover rice from a previous video that I made and put in the freezer. I had to work on Friday and Tom was coming over, and I had some meat from when I was making beef bone broth that I had put away in the freezer. So I pulled that out, made it into with what was it? I had Italian beef liquid that I mixed it in with and just let it simmer for a little bit and heat up. And then we put that over the rice. I just didn't get a picture of it after it was completed. And then the next morning I made a giant omelet. So this is the beginning of the omelet. It's in a 10-inch skillet. So I took some of those bacon bits out of the freezer, and I had some sausage that was already cooked in the freezer and some vegetables from the freezer, and I think peppers, and then onions I chopped. And eggs for my chickens. And I made a great big omelet. And then I cut it in half, and Tom and I shared that, and we topped it with some really spicy salsa that we had here. It was really good. And then that night we had a ham bone I have 2 ham bones. So I got one of them out, made a ham and lentil soup, and let that simmer for a couple of hours, and made some cornbread. This is my all-time favorite cornbread recipe. I think it's a Martina McBride recipe that I got years and years ago, and I have yet to find anything better for cornbread. And So we had that for dinner. And when I make ham and bean or ham and lentil soup, I make it pretty spicy. I put a chipotle pepper in it. So we had a lot of spicy food that day. Next morning, I had some of those pumpkin pancakes in the freezer, enough for another breakfast for Tom and I. And I just sprinkled some mini chocolate chips and some walnuts on top and some pure maple syrup, and that was our breakfast. So earlier in the week, while I was doing bone broth and canning chicken, I made corn tortillas. And the the recipe on the back of the masa package will tell you how to make them, but I get my recipe from Patty, and I can't even begin to say her last name, but she has a cookbook, Patty's Mexican Table, I believe is the name of it. And she's also had a television show on PBS, and she's cooked in the White House, and I think she has YouTube videos. I mean, she's spent her whole life growing up in Mexico, and so I feel like I'm going to go with her recipe. She adds a little more water than what the package will tell you to add, and I haven't gone wrong with it yet. So just some masa, water, and a little salt. I just mix it together with my hand. It feels so silky. It's just a different texture or feeling when you're mixing that together. And so, but it's very silky feeling. So I just mix it together. It comes together pretty quick in the bowl, and then I have a tortilla press. I didn't used to when I first started making this. I just used a big cast iron skillet, and I would get all of my weight on it to try to smash down the tortilla. I never felt like I could get it as thin as I wanted to. So I invested in a cast iron tortilla press, and I am so glad I did, because I make these, I don't make them all the time, but I make them often enough that I just feel like it was worth the investment. I can't remember what I spent on it, but I don't think it broke the bank at all. But as you can see here, it's kind of coming together here. And then I did a double batch here, and I just roll them into individual balls about 1.5 to 2 inches across, and probably 1.5 inches or so, like a ping pong ball kind of. And flatten it out. I put it on the press. I go real easy with the press handle, and then I open it up, flip the tortilla around, and then do it again. And I do that because it makes a more even tortilla. If you only press it one time, I feel like your tortilla is uneven. It's like a wedge instead of flat. So that's how I do it. And I use parchment paper. A lot of times they'll tell you to use plastic. Even Patty, in her book, talks about using plastic. I don't. I use parchment paper, and I have no problem getting it to peel off. You just have to be careful. And you'll see me here the way I do my press. I just do it one way. I don't push real hard, but then I flip it around and continue to flatten it out a little bit more the other way, and it works really well. But I don't have any trouble getting it off of the parchment paper. You just have to be careful, and you'll see how I do it when I take it off here. And I have made them in my cast iron skillets, but I have this griddle. I can do a couple at a time. I could probably even get 3 on there if I really wanted to, but I don't push it. I just put 2 at a time, mainly because it's hard for me to keep track of what part of the process each tortilla is in if I have more than 2 on there. So you put a tortilla on, let it cook for about 45 seconds, and you flip it and let it cook again for about the same. Flip it another time just for a few seconds till it bubbles, and then you take it off. went through 2 batches. I can't remember exactly how many it made, but it was quite a few. And I then divided them up into, well, I can tell you how many. I guess it made, let's see, 36 tortillas because I had 8, 8, and 10. I divided them up into Ziploc bags. Right as soon as they were cool, I put them in the freezer, and then I just took one package out to use this week. So there they are, and they're so good. They're so pliable. They don't break. They're just really good. I don't even fry them, at least not for what I was using them for this week. I just warm them up. I have a little tortilla pocket warmer thing that keeps them warm for me while we're, eating, so they don't get cold on the table, and they stay so pliable. These are so good. They're way better than store-bought. And then this was the Mexican meal that we had. It was a roast that, and I can't even remember what kind of roast it was, quite honestly, but I cut up into pieces and I made carne guisada, I believe is what it's called. And it has like a kind of a gravy mixture, and it's got, it's really mild. It's not, I mean, I guess you can make it as spicy as you want, but it's a pretty mild flavor, but it's got a lot of the Mexican flair to it. And then I also made some Mexican rice, and there's my guacamole. You'll see the onions in them were not white onions because I didn't have white onions. I just pulled out my onions that I had fermenting in the refrigerator, and they were red onions, so that's why you see that color. And then this was our breakfast Monday morning, and I had made over the weekend some zucchini bread, and I put some chocolate chips, the rest of the mini chocolate chips that I had left over from Christmas in a jar in my pantry. I just put those in the bread, and I made a couple loaves in them so I could send some home with my Tom, but it was very good. So anyway, I hope that this gave you some ideas. I hope that you guys have a great week coming up, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Bye-bye.